All right, good morning, Ice Physio family. It is Monday already. Welcome, hope everybody's doing well. As we see if anybody's going to sign on this morning, I will just kind of recap where we're at in the conversation and then jump right into it. So it looks like we got a few folks jumping in. Hey, morning, Allie. So I'm coming off last night. We sort of finished up our latest cohort in the CERT APHPT course, and oh, hey, thanks for the compliment on the tree there. Yeah, it's Christmas time in the Eisenhardt household. All the stockings hung by the chimney with care. So we finished up the cohort last night, and it was pretty fun. We had such a great group, and really solid discussion, and I just feel like each cohort as we go is getting stronger and stronger, and the message is getting clearer and clearer, and I think that it's a real testament to kind of the linking of this entire group of folks, both the family of people within the aphpt.org and the coursework through Ice Physio and the conversation around it that's kind of connecting all the dots. It's been really fun for me and exciting to see more and more professionals kind of putting this together. So that was I'm coming off kind of a little bit of a high there from last night, and getting ready to roll right into the next group in early January. So this time of year for me is a lot of times a chance to kind of sit down. Oh crap! I almost forgot to start the watch. Let me start the watch. Okay, so this time of year is often a time for me to kind of reset and settle in. For a while there, it used to be like December 15th to January 15th were sort of like bookends, and they would give us a chance to kind of wind down for the year, think about next year, plan a little bit, get our heads on straight. I think that this year it might be a little compressed like it was last year. I don't know that we'll have that much time, but maybe even just the next few days, it gives us a chance to kind of settle in and think about and kind of this sort of time of year. So that relates to the Christmas tree in the back, which I hope whether you are celebrating that particular holiday or some other holiday or no holiday at all, it gives you the same kind of thing. But one of the things that I spent some time doing in preparation for this, and really over the last couple of weeks I've been thinking a lot about, is continuing to refine this connection that I think we're starting to sort of see play out in the world more and more. Several months ago, we talked a little bit about allostatic load and this idea that when the body is constantly fighting, when it's constantly revving up, and it's always kind of on edge, and it's always sort of getting beaten up, there are physical signs of that, right? So if it's an emotional type thing or a stressful type thing, there are signs of the body breaking down more than maybe it should. And so I've been, really fascinated by that all year long, and I've been trying to kind of continue to poke at that and connect the dots a little bit for people and really have good conversations as a result. And so one of the threads that I thought might be really timely, because of where we are in the news cycle and because of where things are, is going back and sort of reiterating and maybe illuminating for some people who don't know it, the connection between what we all know to be a really important thing, especially in the world of pain, things like hypervigilance, and how that relates to other sources of kind of health. So one of the things that's been really kind of neat in the literature is metabolic syndrome and how that's tied to things like depression and anxiety. So from like 2007, maybe even earlier, you can find studies out there and people sort of doing reviews connecting the dots on these things. And everybody just sort of thought that, well, a person who's carrying extra weight, if you're heavy and you're carrying weight, you're going to be a little bit, the system's going to be a little bit more stressed out, and you're going to, probably have additional, sort of sequelae that are going to be with you, comorbidities and such. And that makes total sense, and that's kind of plausible, and you could totally see that in the line of thinking and even the conversation, right? So we've made obesity a disease. We label it as that. We focus all on weight loss. We keep telling people, calories in, calories out. You should exercise more. All that same line of thinking, which kind of gets us to this idea that it's the weight, it's the metabolic, dysfunction or dyslipidemia, and that's all sort of preceding everything else. It's the early part. It's the problem, right? And if we could just get people thin again, we wouldn't have all this other stuff. And, that's something that quite honestly drives me absolutely insane, because we know that the science is not there to support that and only that. We certainly know that it's a factor, but we can't say that it is the only factor. And so what I've tried to dive into is the idea of, what if it was reversed? What if it was that the system itself was so revved up or beginning to break down that then the output, right? The input is a system that's kind of revved up and having a hard time. Then the output is all these other things, including things like metabolic syndrome. So in 2007, and I'll sort of go back and find these and post them for anybody who's interested. But in 2007, there was the first thing that I saw of a decent sample size, 37,000 people that they sort of followed, and basically what they found was that depression preceded diabetes, but not the other way around, right? So type 2, diabetes, depression came first. That they could sort of see this, and that people's lives were changing, and that they started to look at this and say, well, the way a person's sort of cognitive state is, the way their mental health is, actually came first. But they didn't see the reverse. They didn't see that that folks who had diabetes were depressed, which was sort of against conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom was, well, I've got this condition, and any kind of chronic condition would lead to some depression, anxiety, maybe about the condition itself, right? So, and that would make total sense, but that's not what this group found. What they went back is they said, no, actually, we didn't necessarily see that, but we did see the idea that which came first. It seemed to be that the depression came first. And then what started to happen is they started to say, well, maybe this kind of depression, anxiety axis, this mental health axis, well-being, whatever you want to call it, is enough to sort of trip the body. And when you trip the system, it starts to sort of run differently. And when it starts to run differently, we have these other outputs. So then what happened was in 2013, people started poking around. A lot of this work is done in the Netherlands. They have a prospective study of a couple of thousand people, and I don't remember what the university is, but there's a couple of researchers who pop up quite a bit in this topic. And so what they found was that people who kind of had this like neural sensitivity, this revved up, ramped up system, they kind of came with this model that said, well, if you have sort of increased sensitivity on the system overall, then you may have a prolonged threat response, right? So the whole threat mechanism, the whole idea of vigilance, the idea of fight or flight, whatever you want to call that, but like you're going to have this prolonged response that you see a threat, you observe a threat, but it's going to last. It's not going to just kind of roll off for you. And that sort of cranked up system, that system that's revved up and running too long, eventually creates this higher level of the autonomic nervous system output and inflammation. And that was kind of their neurobiological model. They said, well, okay, so the model would be that if you have a revved up system, you're going to be more inflamed. And then, that same year, 2013, people came back and they began to look at this and they said, yeah, actually, that's what we found. In people with metabolic syndrome, they started to find that low-grade inflammation and smoking, seem to be predictors and seem to, kind of connect the dots a little bit. So then, and we've sort of talked about this a little bit, both in the course and in some of these conversations, and certainly in a ton of conversations I've had on the side. And then in 2016, what they found was that heart rate, actually predicted some of these problems, right? That if you took someone's resting heart rate, so there's a shout out to, all the vitals are vital people, but if you took someone's resting heart rate, and that resting heart rate, of course, being an indicator of a system that's revved up, maybe the easiest indicator we could possibly have. But then they also looked at things like, respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So when I breathe in, does my heart rate change versus when I breathe out? Of course, we know that when we inhale, heart rate is supposed to speed up a little bit. When we exhale, it's supposed to slow down a little bit. And so what did they find? They found that also was a factor. So that was 2016. And then 2017, which I can't find the full study yet. This is a cool one. And I think it's like one of the geriatric societies. But what they started to look at was they said, well, what about if we screened for anxiety and depression? Would that predict 10-year onset of diabetes, right? So this is something that is really cool, because this is something we've done a lot in the heart disease literature. We've certainly seen that certain things kind of like are predictors. But could mental health and well-being actually be a predictor of diabetes onset? And what the abstract says, but I can't find the study itself, what the abstract says is that anxiety is yes, depression seemed to be no. So what does all that tell us? What it comes down and tells us is that again, which is something that we've sort of said all in, over and over and over and over again, which is that these are all the same disease. These are all the same output of a system that has gone from stress to distress. Now, in our world, in APHPT world, and population health world, what we are sort of thinking is, well, what are the things that distress a system? What are the things that, that cause a human experience to rev up and be consistently revved up? And certainly we know there are health factors there. We know that there are socioeconomic factors there. We know that there are job-related factors there. There's just, you name it. There's all sorts of things that can rev you up. But things that put you in that state and keep you there obviously have a bad downstream effect. So in essence, that's what we're trying to wrap our heads around as practitioners. And I guess sort of the take-home message for me is that I don't see any one provider who has this completely nailed down in their education and in a comprehensive way. I don't see any one provider who is saying, yeah, let me sort of lay all of these variables out on the table and begin to figure out what it is that is putting you from sort of stress, which of course we know can make us stronger, to distress, which over time is going to break us down. And in so doing, being able to show that, yeah, this is not just sort of like a in-your-head mental health thing, and it's not even just something like in our world, which is high vigilance and the potential for pain. This is a biological chronic disease mechanism that winds up causing all sorts of future problems, from quality of life to cost expenditure to utilization of the healthcare system. You name it. And so what that does for me is that sort of takes me back to this time of year, and so what does the next week or two hold for me personally? What does the next week or two hold for you personally? And the willingness for us to start to look at this and say, yeah, it's not about necessarily balance. We hear that term all the time, that there should be a balance. I don't know if I buy that, but what I do think there should be is the ability to sort of step back, take a deep breath, and recover. And, we talk about that a lot, sort of this move, fuel, recover, three-legged stool. We talk about that, in APHPT, certainly in the CERT course quite a bit. But the idea is that there are three things, that are sort of like these three legs of the stool, that you can move and move enough, that you fuel the right way and that you recover. And the idea of recover often sort of morphs into the conversation of sleep, which is fine because most of us are under-rested. But it's really the idea of taking a step back and letting the system decompress. Letting the system calm itself back down, doing things that are going to help you to, to counteract the anxiety, the distress of life. And I think that's really the bigger picture, is when we start talking to people and we start realizing that some of these, social disparities of health, what it really comes down to is people who are just constantly overcooked. They're just revved up, and that the human system is not built to be in a state of anxiety all the time. I've seen things in the news and people talking about, the United States of anxiety. You can Google that. The fact that we just run harder and faster and push more and just constantly trying to grind and grind and grind. And although I'm usually a subscriber of that, I'm usually one who's saying, yeah, grind it out, push it out hard. This is the time. It's sort of like the old, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. That idea of today is your best day, make hay while the sun shines. That kind of an idea. I'm a big believer of that. But this time of year, it might be good for us to just kind of pause for a second, take a, stock of the situation, take a deep breath, and in a sense, find ways to slow down and relax. And the main reason why, of course, is because if nothing else, we need to learn those tactics so that when we're talking to the person in front of us, we can intelligently say, hey, I know that you're here because your knee hurts. Or I know that you're here because your foot hurts. Or I know that I'm standing in front of you because your company wants you to be the best version of you. They want you to be the most productive, the happiest. They want you to have a positive contagion on your work environment. That's why I'm here. That's what I get paid to do, to help you live that version of your life. And sometimes the very best thing you can do is calm this thing down. Because if we can calm this thing down, if we can work on your breathing, if we can work on that respiratory sinus arrhythmia, if we can get your heart rate variability in check, if we can find ways to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system and maybe suppress that autonomic nervous system activity a little bit, if we can find ways for you to have a little more joy in your life this time of year, then maybe you go a long way. Maybe things for your health go a long way. And so if I'm really giving you good quality advice, I'm not just simply saying, yes, the physical activity guidelines suggest that you should do 150 minutes of aerobic activity a week. Yeah, that's good. It's a start. Okay, it's a start, but it's not the whole thing. Because the physical activity guidelines don't suggest the fact that after that, 5-minute walk, because that's all you can fit in your life and feel good about yourself, that maybe what you should do is just sit and relax and listen to the birds chirp if you're in a place where there are birds, or watch the sunset if you're in a place where the sun sets. That's the kind of stuff. Why? Because it may prevent your diabetes in the future. It may prevent your metabolic syndrome in the future. Now, if we really want to get into the clinical science of this, we can start looking at things like your triglycerides, right? Your HDL, your LDL. We can look at those things. We can look at your blood sugar. Tie it back to your stress levels. Think about the fact that, was there a time, and we do it with pain. If we know anything about pain, we take the time to say to someone, hey, do you think there's a connection between times in life when you're really stressed out and flare-ups in your pain? That's completely normal. Do we do that same thing with someone saying, hey, do we think that there's a connection in the stress of your life and, that raise in triglycerides or those extra 5 pounds you put around your waistline? Pick something, whatever, it doesn't matter. And if so, and maybe we'll get into this next week a little bit because I know we're probably running short on, 34 seconds, running short on time. If so, how are we going to dose it properly? How can I give you the right dose of move, the right dose of fuel, the right dose of recover? Because when we do that, and only really when we do that, can we begin to build you some health assets that will allow you to endure. Only when we pull in that connection point, only when we pull in those people in your life and help them to help you find places where there is a little bit of joy, can we actually begin to help you to endure on the long term. Only when we build those skills, build those assets, there it is, build those assets, sort of in your bank account, can you actually endure on the long term. So, this is a great time of year to do it. I hope everybody has this opportunity as well. I'm really looking forward to the next couple of weeks. I stood on the sideline yesterday for my last kids soccer game of the season. So that's kind of, back down a little bit. And the cohort wrapped up last night, although I'm really looking forward to the next one. So there'll be a little bit of downtime. In life. And I hope you have that same thing. I heard from somebody yesterday that their finals were this week or something and they're going crazy, but there'll be a little bit of downtime. And when that downtime comes, I hope you take a second to just kind of settle back, take a deep breath, and let the system recover. Because when the system recovers, then you can go hard at it again. And the next chance to go hard at it again will be here before you know it. Listen, it's Monday. I hope you are feeling excited about the week, and I hope you're continuing to look in your family, friends, and community about how you can make an impact on their health. Thanks for being with me this morning. Thanks for everything this year. It's been a really, really good year. I'm looking forward to December. Have a great rest of the day. It's only Monday. Make it count.